Talofa, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I've just had to move to my garage to get a better internet connection.
Yep, we can hear you.
Oh, good. O Lo'ongo o Rose, and I'm from Cluster 12, and it's my privilege to introduce our two Pacific guest speakers from the Ministry Learning Support Team in Botany here in Auckland. I'll just give you some background about how we started working together with our ministry friends and why we asked them to speak to you all this morning. In our postgrad study, we learnt that interprofessionals can learn with, from, and about each other to develop a shared understanding of their different practices. And our Pacific team in Cluster 12 decided to put this into action and found out that there were two Pacific SLTs and one Ed Psych in the learning support team that work with our cluster. So we approached Sonia, Chermei, and Amy and met them once a term, and we started to have conversations about how we could collaborate to support the Pacific students and families that we were all working with. We then invited our Tautai friends from Cluster 9, 10 and 11, who also work with the learning support team, and our Massey friends, Malia and Rosina, who also bring another perspective. Our group has grown since we first started. We continue to meet once a term, and we have called ourselves Takaua, which Sonia can hopefully explain more about the Tongan meaning. And some of the things that we have been focusing on are unpacking He Pukeroa and what it looks like from a Pacific perspective. And recently we've been researching and presenting as a team all the different Pacific wellbeing frameworks. So we have been very busy. So I'd now like to pass it over to Sonia and Chermei. And if you have any questions during their presentations, please put them into the chat. Thank you, Sonia and Chermei.
Thank you, Rose. So before we start, I'll just quickly introduce myself. Kolepe ke hufanga ngai whakatapa ko asa awhaki, ka tau mau ke whai atu aki I lea no. Ke tupe ku whai ko lea ko whakamaulau ke otoa, hene o mai pa matauhi tautolu ke ahoni. So as Rose said, my name is Sonia. I'm an educational psychologist at the Ministry of Education. I service the Manurewa and Papatoa area, so I work closely with Cluster 12 and Cluster 10. I've been at the ministry for about 4 years now, coming up to 4 years, and I'm Tongan, and I'm just grateful to be in this space. So thank you for having me, and I'll pass it over to Chermei.
Talofa lava ma lole soifua. Yes, my name is Chermei, and thank you, Rose, for that lovely introduction, and also for that lovely activity where we were just in the breakout rooms. It reinforces to me, as I put in the chat, that those connections and relationship building is everything. I felt all of my nerves going away as I met with my group earlier, and we made some connections, so thank you for that. Like Sonia, I am in learning support. As Rose said, I'm one of our speech language therapists, one of our very few Pacifica speech language therapists. And Sonia and I are in the same team, and we started at the ministry at the same time. So I can't confirm nor deny if we found ways to get ourselves in the same team. But yes, we do work quite closely with Cluster 12. A little bit about me. My father is from Samoa, from Vaiala. This is my background here. I'm manifesting being in Samoa at the moment. But my mother is Dutch. She's from Holland. And I was born and raised here in New Zealand. So I feel very proud to be representative of so many of the Tamaiti that we work with. New Zealand-born Pacifica fruit salads, as some might say, but we have the privilege of having multicultural or many world perspectives, which I'm grateful to have. And today, Sonia and I were just so happy to be here with all of you. And I'll pass it back to Sonia to start us off today.
Thank you, Chermei. While Brian is sharing the slides again, we do have a group formed called Takaua, and Brian said that Sonia, we have so many Samoan names in our teams. We need a Tongan one, and so I said, okay, say less. And so I just went home to my dad and I said, Dad, can you give me like 3 names? And so one of them was called Takaua, and we all kind of came into agreement on what Takaua means. So Taka means journey, and Ua means two. And so we thought that there was a perfect way to portray our relationship with RTLB and RTLB with Ministry of Education, because we're on this journey together. And Takawa means that you're going through the oceans, all the rivers, side by side, a journey that has to be done together. And we felt that with RTLB and MOE, that's a perfect illustration of how we work side by side and together. So thank you, Brian and Rose.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, cool.
All good?
Yep, all good. So next slide. The first thing that we kind of wanted to talk about was if I know some RTLBs in this space have been here for say 20 years or even more, but we wanted to take some time to actually explain what our ministry services look like, especially under the learning support team. You might know that in the Ministry of Education, there's two sides. So one side is the education team. Our education team look after all the education policies, look after all, like property or anything that kind of doesn't fall into learning support. So for example, everything that happened around COVID-19 or the kind of strategies or policies around what schools look like during COVID and the transition back from COVID, that sits under the education team. On the other side, you have the learning support, and this is where me and Chermei kind of fall under. So this is the learning support side. So as you can see on the slide here, our team is comprised of KTWs, our Kai Takawainga. Those are our Māori advisors. We have AUDC, so advisors of the deaf children. We have special educational advisors. So those are the people that look after all the OARS cases and do all the rostering around, teacher aid hours and whatever support all students kind of need. They might work closely with a special education advisor for behavior. So there's a kind of like we call them in my team mini psychologists. They're not a registered psychologist, but they do a lot of the behavior work, especially around the early intervention and ECE kind of side of things. On the top, you have OTs, occupational therapists. They work alongside our OAR students. We also have people like me, educational psychologists, who work purely with behavior for kids from as early as 2 years old all the way up to 16. You have people like Chermei, who are SLT, speech language therapists. You have early intervention teachers who work with the ECE kids. Our education support workers who we contract to work on, more of a one-on-one base with our ECE kids. And those kind of services in red is where, our external agencies or, those we have an external partnership with. So that is including RTLB, Ohomairangi, and the CCS Disability Action. In the middle, in the boxes in green, those are all our funding streams. So we do offer teacher aid funding as well as OARS funding. Over here we have intensive early support, so IES funding, and that's funding that's only given for applications, who meet the requirements of 0 to 8, but also who need intensive wraparound support. And so once you finish, or once you are over the age of 8, you no longer qualify for IES, but what you might be qualified for is IWS, which is intensive wraparound services in the bottom blue box there at the bottom. Otherwise, other funding streams we offer is assistive tech, high complex needs, UBRS workshops, which is understanding behavior, responding safely, safe restraint, incredible years. And what we had from last year up until this year is the urgent response funding. So that's kind of funding that, to help cover the impact of COVID-19. On the bottom, just quickly, we have 3 of our systems kind of services. So again, intensive wraparound service, that's pretty self-explanatory. It's students who identify very intense, who need very intense support and very need intensive service around not only the child, but around their family as well as their community. You also have behavior crisis response service. So whether a child is, climbing fences, running out to roads, or, could be a child who's hitting somebody in the face, just kind of immediate action that, that schools or, teachers never saw coming. They can bring up the behavior service and the crisis team can come out and visit you, as well as the traumatic incidents team. It just says here team, but that is the traumatic incident. So whatever traumatic incidents that schools are going through, whether it's a death of a teacher or death of a child, unexpected, traumatic incidents, car crash happened right in front of school, or, sexual abuse or kind of self-harm or things like that come under traumatic incidents. You just ring the traumatic incidents line and the team will come out and visit you and support however they can, whether it's, communication to schools, communications to parents, scripts to teachers, scripts to students. That's basically what the traumatic incidents team does. So that's pretty much just a round of Ministry of Education services, and we kind of just want you to know, if you haven't, if you don't know already, the kind of services that we offer, or the kind of services that we can partnership with you over some of these things that we offer. So yeah, that is it, and I'm going to pass it over to Chermei.
Thank you, Sonia. Yes, again, some of you may be very familiar with this information already, so I'll try and keep it brief. But as speech language therapists, we often are the most lucky in our team that we get to collaborate and co-work with RTLBs the most. So I thought I'd give a brief overview of some of our speech language therapist services. And apologies to Brian, I realized I had a lot of animations in these slides from when I shared it with the school, so apologies for all the clicking.
It's all good.
But basically, we work a lot in the early intervention space. So with RTLBs, often we'll be doing transitions into school, but also in the school space as well. And some of the children we may work with, it could be around speech, so difficulties with certain sounds, for example, or patterns from earlier on that they haven't overcome yet. So that cute saying tat instead of cat is no longer cute when they're 7. So things like that we might support with. Language, obviously children who need more help with building their vocabulary and sentence structures, or even being able to understand and follow instructions. Voice is a little bit more rare, but we do encounter these cases sometimes. Children who have, whether it's structural difficulties, maybe really husky voices, or very nasal voices. These are things we might investigate and help families with. Fluency or stuttering, again, not as common as some of our more speech and language type cases, but we support families and schools with this. Social communication, so often associated with our children on the autism spectrum. We may support and work together around visuals, for example, or social skills groups. As a colleague from the RTLB Cluster 10 and I have been working on recently, or assistive technology, again, helping students with other methods for communication is something we'll collaborate with. Next slide, thanks, Brian. Wonderful. You may have seen this diagram before. We often share it with families and often with schools too, who may still have traditional views of our work. A speech language therapist comes in and does one-to-one sessions with the child multiple times a week. But really our job, similar to yours, is to build the capability of the adults to help the parents and the teachers, who are the most important people in this child's life, with them the most, help them to know strategies or resources or ideas that they can build into their everyday lives and routines. And next from there, I think it's great. Rose mentioned earlier, we've been doing a lot of work together with Tautai around our perspective on the He Pikurua model as Pasifika practitioners. But just to give a brief overview, for example, what it may look like for a speech language therapist you're co-working with. Often at that building connection stage, it's really important to meet with the family Obviously, we get referrals, we meet and gather consent. Then comes an assessment phase, where again, it's so wonderful to be able to collaborate with RTLBs to gather information, meet with teachers, meet with the team, and work together to help this child the best and their family. And similar to you, of course, there's lots of planning meetings, IEPs, lunchtime meetings. I always feel horrible for taking any free time a teacher may have before school, after school, their morning tea break. But that's often what it looks like in our working with schools. And then implementation, which we'll get to on the next slide. Often we work together on different programs and different strategies. And just to give you an idea on the next slide, please, Brian, what some of those strategies may look like. And some of you may have worked with SLTs around some of these things before. Obviously, there's planning with or providing training for teachers or teacher aides together. A lot of classroom modifications often, as much as possible. How can we work in the strategies or the visuals, whatever it may be, into the everyday classroom, not just for the child, the target child, for example, but for all the students to benefit them. Often we support with oral language groups, phonological awareness groups, social skills groups, school-wide initiatives, or even junior school initiatives, for example. They may have a priority around promoting oral language in the whole school, or they want all of the junior school to implement talk to learn or colourful semantics, for example. And so we together often would support with that. We support ongoing referrals, language and learning intervention, LLI. I often joke this is the one access of funding that SLTs get for those students who need more of an individualized, targeted plan. There's language and learning intervention. And last but not least, personalised speech or language programs. So for example, with Cluster 10, our schools in Papatoi had what was called an LCSW project, or Learning Communication Support Worker Project, because we all love acronyms, where a teacher aide or a learning assistant in the school took on the role of receiving more training around communication from the SLTs and also the RTLBs to provide repetitive and targeted support within the school. And then of course there again, core boards or assistive technology again. Great, I think that's the last slide there, was it, Brian?
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. To finish up before I pass to Sonia, I suppose something we've gone back and forth with, especially in talking with Brian and Rose leading up to this, was, you know, why are we here, and how does working with Takaua, for example, make a difference in our work? And as I alluded to earlier, I thought I'd share nationwide. Previously, we had 5 Pasifika speech language therapists. In the last 6 months or so, 3 have left, but 1 has joined. So now there's 3 of us that I'm aware of in the country. And again, as you may be aware of, we work with a lot of Pasifika families, especially here in Tamaki Makaurau. So I really loved the theme today where, sorry, I'll just paraphrase, it talked about collaborating can help us overcome some of the biggest difficulties. And I can honestly say in my work, one of the biggest difficulties is just feeling like there's such a demand, there's so much need out there, and so few SLTs in general, and even fewer Pasifika SLTs. And it's easy to get bogged down, weighed down with, oh, I've got caseloads, I've got wait lists, got to do this quickly, got to get through this process, pick up more cases, close more cases. And meeting with the Takaua group and with all of you reminds me of that bigger picture, helps me to remember that some of those values, such as relationships and connections, as we talked about earlier, it's not just a nice thing that we talk about and that we chuck aside when it's inconvenient and I've got things to work through, but actually it's the main part of my work. It's, I think, what makes my work most successful is because of those relationships and connections that we build, not just with families, but with each other, with our schools. And so I just wanted to say that part of being in this group and with Takaua is one of those greatest highlights for me. It helps me to remember and give me the motivation when we get tired in week 9 and 10 of the term to keep pressing on and working within those values that we hold dear to us. So thank you very much. I'll pass it over to Sonia, who's going to share some more practical strategies around engaging with Pasifika students and families.
Thanks, Chermei. You're awesome.
Thank you, Chermei. Yep, back to the slideshow. I also just realized that Jill Ford is here, and she's from National Office under Ministry of Education. So I just wanted to say, sorry, Jill, if we did a terrible job of summing up, Ministry of Education services, having been here for about 4 years. But hopefully everyone now has just kind of got the gist, and then it's up to you to go and do your own research. So I guess moving on, I wanted to talk about, so because there was a need for Pacific support amongst our clusters, one of the things that they kind of reached out to, Chermei or me, is that they needed some practical strategies. Now, I've been in a space where I've been able to go into these clusters and give, workshops around engaging with Pacifica and practical strategies of how do you build, quality connection and relationship with Pacifica families or students or clients. And saying that, there is much more work that needs to be done in that space. However, there are only limited support services that could offer that kind of knowledge. For example, I will happily do it, but there's only one of me, and there's only one there's actually two Pacific psychologists in the Ministry of Education. One of them is in Auckland, that is me, and one of them is in Hamilton, and that is another Rob Lotta. He's a community psychologist. And we are the only two Pacific psychologists in the ministry in the whole of New Zealand. So we are very limited in our space, and that work itself could be a full-time job. So I do try and help out where I can and offer my services and offer, my knowledge of expertise. But sometimes it doesn't kind of reach out more than it should because of, like Chermei said, caseloads and things like that. So one thing, sorry about that. That's my dog, doesn't like, okay, so anyways, go back to the slideshow.
Right. Okay,
so ready? One thing that we talked about that we bring in terms of, if you go to the next one, the Fono. So for those who have been working alongside Pacifica students, you might have seen this model, because this model has been the basic forefront of Pacifica Wellbeing and Pacifica House. New Zealand has used this specific model for like the last 10 years. And so it's pretty self-explanatory in working with Pacific families. It shows that, family is really that forefront and it's the strong foundation of any Pacific family or working with Pacific people. Family is really at the forefront. It's the strong foundation. On top of that, you have your spiritual, physical, mental, and other well-being, which is sheltered by the roof, which is this culture. Okay, so this is saying that when you work with families, Pacifica families, you obviously try and build that connection with their family, but then you also try and build on their spiritual well-being, their mental well-being, their spiritual well-being, and be inconsiderate of the cultural values that guide their life. The cultural values that they follow through, that they live their everyday functioning around, whether it's like church values, those values of, for example, respecting your elders, serving your elders before you serve yourself, knowing your roles in a specific environment, whether you belong in the kitchen or whether you belong making teas or whether you belong in the forefront making speeches. Those are the cultural roles that Pacific people follow. So one thing that I always, think as a psychologist is, how do we make that into a practical sense? If this is the theory, if this is what the theory tells us in terms of how we work with Pacifica families, how do we bring that into our practical cases? How do we bring that into our everyday workload? So if you move on to the next slide, Brian. I've started to think of ways of how I can build a Fono Fale model into my practice. Now, one thing that always comes up is how do we engage with our Pacifica students, or a lot of questions that come to me is how do we engage with our Pacifica families? There's this connection game, because we do like to build on connection. So there's a game that we put where we have a piece of string, and a lot of everywhere kind of uses this game, but if you talk about yourself, then and somebody has a something in common with you, they're supposed to say something, and you're supposed to pass along the string. And obviously, at the end of the game, you have all these kind of wires or intertwined kind of connections. But that is supposed to illustrate to students that you have a connection with somebody else in the class, and that's just kind of supposed to build the sense of connection and sense of belonging. And a lot of our Pacifica students need to feel that safe and that reassurance and that sense of belonging in order to succeed inside their classrooms. So that's one thing, strategy that I take back to my team and as well the classes that I'm working with. Brian, just go next. Another thing that I do is the Tauhiva activity, and this is just a fun art activity that you can use to get to know your Pacific students better. There's a YouTube video there of me doing, of actually showing you how to do that in real life, and exactly what you need and how to portray the questions, which I won't show today, but I would definitely share this out when Brian shares it out, and you can watch it in your own time. Just going next, Brian. We also have the colored candy game that I like to do with my students. So usually I just get a bag of Starburst, the ones with the different colors. I hand out the lollies to the students. I don't tell them yet, but after they've all picked the lolly, I put the slide up, and based on the color that they picked up, they will answer this question. So if you have yellow, you have to introduce yourself and say, what do you usually do on Sundays? Now, if you really, analyze this game, these questions actually reflect the Fono Fale model. So, you have yellow here, which is what do you usually do on Sundays? So that's your spiritual well-being. You have red, who are you most like, your mom or dad, or why? And that's hitting your family component. There's orange here, describe a moment where you were proud of your culture. That's the cultural component. And so that's just a nice way for us to use that practical strategies. But again, the underlying kind of influence there is the Fono Fale model, and ensuring that we're hitting all those cultural dimensions or the main dimensions of the Fono Fale and the well-being. Now, I do want to apologize if I'm going a little bit too fast, because we do have a time component. And usually when I do this workshop, it's over, I do it over 3 hours. But I've just kind of nitpicked specific things to share, just to give you an idea of some of the things that, that I do in my job, or the way I kind of support RTLB in this specific space. So moving on, Brian. I also made a snakes and ladders game. So if you can see here, I tried to, the way I created this game, I made sure that each of the rows is hitting a piece of information that I'm interested in. For example, the first row talks about your interest as a child. The second row talks about your, I can't really see, but there was a row there about, how do you feel about school? There's a row there about how do you feel about your family? There's a row there about what are your dreams and hopes? There's a row there about, if you could achieve one goal this term, what would it be? And then there's another row there that talks about support people in your life. So who knows you the best and who is the closest to you? As you can also see, the yellow kind of square pieces there, the stars, those are my ladders, but that's also the strengths of a child. So it's things like what makes you happy, what makes you smile and why, when were the happiest moments in your life. And then the snakes, they are also act as the improvements in that child's life. So what makes you angry? What are your triggers? You know, who are the people that don't know you the least and or you want to build more rapport with? So that's just a good, you know, snakes and ladders game that we use to kind of build that rapport. And obviously it's really fun for students when you put in a game rather than that interview kind of phase, because it can get really awkward and intimidating for young students, you know, to sit there and say, oh, what do you like? And so this is just a great game for, you know, for me and the students to really focus on and build that rapport without that intimidation of, you know, me being older and the child just being that child in the classroom. So I bring this game to Brian, and if you go next, Brian looked at that and said, oh, that looks really old. I'm going to change it up for you. And he did. And he made it into more of a 3D version because I'm tech savvy. And, you know, it's great because a lot of my kids like this 3D version better. But I just love the collaboration that I was, you know, able to have with Brian and his cluster around getting feedback for that. And, you know, they came back on board and they said, oh, we love your idea, Sonia. Why don't we change it for more of this? And this is a collaboration that, you know, Ministry of Education are doing with RTLB. And since then, we've been able to share these resources and get a lot of positive feedback, you know, around other people who are using it, all because of this, you know, collaboration that we're doing with our Takaua kind of group. Next. Another thing that I usually do when I'm advocating in my Pacific spaces is I try and advocate for teachers and RTLB to use cultural stories, as we know that in our practice we might use a lot of social stories. We might recommend teachers to read, you know, books in terms, for example, transition books. But what I found is that, you know, we have a lot of cultural stories that we can use to help, you know, students, Pacifica students, just find that connection and that relevance. For example, when I talk about this cultural story of Maui brings fire to the world, that talks about anger and physical outbursts. So my students, my Pacifica students or my Māori students are able to make the connection because they see themselves in Maui. The other story is the story of Ranginui and Papatukunuku, so that parent separation and the effect that can have on the children. So there was a child that I had that was their parents were going through a divorce, and when I introduced them to the story, they really liked the story because they felt that cultural connection. There's multiple and heaps and heaps of stories, cultural stories that you can use. For example, Maui the fish, Maui brings fire, Maui slows down the sun, and that all kind of just portrays Maui as a curious, creative, and innovative child who doesn't usually follow the rules. And a lot of my students can resonate with that, and so that's why they love hearing about these cultural stories. So that's just one thing that you can use as well in your practice. Moving on, Brian. Now, I'll just go back, Brian, a little bit. I just don't want to jump the gun, sorry. So the thing with the Fono Fale model is that this is a pan-Pacific view of well-being, okay? And so we have the model and we explain what the model looks like. And now we've also explained the practical strategies of how we can implement the Fono Fale model into our practice. Now, the great thing about the model is that it's a pan-Pacific view. So it's an umbrella that all Pacific countries can fall under. But there's only one weakness that I would say the Fono Fale model has, and that it's an umbrella term that doesn't capture the ethnic specific views of well-being within each country. So for example, I did some research, and if you press next, Brian, I found that not only do you have the Fono Fale model, but you have ethnic specific well-being models of practice. So you might know the Whare Tapawha, which is the Māori well-being model. I also found a Tongan well-being model and a Hawaiian well-being model. And even the last group meeting we have with the Auckland RTLB Pacific clusters, the Tautai group last time, is that we actually divvied up all 8 Pacific main countries, and we each went and had homework, and we had to find the well-being model for that country. So for example, we had the Fijian well-being model, we had the Kiribati well-being model, we had the Tuvalu well-being model, we had the Niuean well-being model, and after a day of presentations, we were able to come back with 8 new Pacific well-being models. So this picture is probably not the best picture to demonstrate just how many Pacific well-being models there are in this space. Now, if you continue on, Brian, now this is the issue that we are coming to now, is that you have this pan-Pacific view of well-being, which is the Fono models, which is what we follow, but we also need to keep in mind the ethnic view of well-being as well. Now, if I pose you the question of this, in the screen, you can see the different well-being models. Can you see any similarities? Okay, if yes, what is it? Can you see any differences? If yes, what is it? And you know, and then even put yourself in that space, because I know a lot of people in this space are not from Pacific descent, but then you also have a different view of well-being. So if I were to ask you, what is your symbol of well-being? You know, you might say, I've asked this to a lot of people, and they all come back with different things. I've had people say a glass of wine. I've had people say rock. I have people say actually a water bottle has even at one point. And so I had another person say a lightning bolt at one point. So if I were to put those pictures up there as well, then you can see that distinct differences of how people view their well-being. Now, if you don't kind of incorporate the views of well-being for that family, you will not be able to make that connection with the family. For example, if you have a Māori family that you're working with, but you go in there with a pan-Pacific view of well-being rather than the Fono view of well-being, then that could create the disconnection between you and that family, and you will not be able to make that quality rapport that, you know, helps us get over the line and be able to do our service. So moving on, Brian. Now, to add to the complexity of not only having a pan-Pacific well-being model and having an ethnic view of the ethnic views of well-being model, there's also this intergenerational view of well-being. And I think it's, we often forget this part of, you know, working with students, and this particular study, and these other studies that come on and you know, support this, the need for the intergenerational view of well-being. So that's just saying, like, you have your Tongan grandmothers who've been born and raised in Tonga, for example, have lived in Tonga up until they're 60 years old and only has recently moved to New Zealand. Their view of well-being is totally different from Tongan mothers who might have been born and raised in Tonga, but have been living in New Zealand, say, for like the last 20 years. And their view of well-being is completely different from New Zealand-born daughters who've been born in New Zealand and raised in New Zealand and have adapted to the New Zealand kind of lifestyle and a New Zealand view of what well-being looks like to them. So when you put them all in one picture, it kind of creates this complexity around intergenerational views. And when I work with my clients, you know, I might come into the space and talk to grandmother, because grandmother might be, you know, the person looking after the child because mom is working day in and day out. And grandmother might tell me, Sonia, this is what I want for my child. And I said, okay, that's great. Then I move on and I talk with mom, and mom says, oh, don't listen to grandma. This is what my child needs. And I go, okay, that's great. But then I might work with the kid and get the child voice, and the child voice might be completely different to what their mother is saying and to what their grandmothers are saying. And now I'm here in this space stuck because I have to create a support plan that is supportive of the grandmother's sayings, or, you know, what the mother is saying, but also it has to include what the student is saying and has to include that student voice. So just wanted to portray this really big picture of, you know, some of the kind of things you might be dealing with when you're engaging with Pacific families. Is that, yes, we have this pan-Pacific view of well-being that we're considering. We also have to consider the ethnic view of well-being. And then on top of that, we have to also consider the generational views of well-being in our practice. What is the next slide after that, Brian? Okay. And so if I've totally just freaked you out and give you information overload, and you're sitting there thinking, well, this is way too much, how the heck am I supposed to go back and work with my Pacific families? I just, I give reassurance to the people that I work with, whether it's my teachers or the RTLBs, and I say, look, this is what you need in order to build really strong quality rapport with your clients. If you have a client, and this is the great thing about this, is that this doesn't only apply for Pacific students. I think that this applies for all cultures, in New Zealand, because I want to help professionals in terms of teaching them the skills of cultural competency rather than, how to just work with Pacific students. So when the values that you apply for Pacific students, you should be applying it for any kind of cultural students that you work with, whether it's Chinese, Indian. And so, for example, when you get a culture that you're unfamiliar with, you might know surface level things about that culture. For example, you might understand a little bit of, how they dress and how they celebrate and, their food and the kind of music that they listen to and the kind of food that they eat. That is not enough for you to build that quality rapport and enough for you to build that really, really strong connection. What you need to be doing is finding out these kind of dimensions here at the bottom, is the deep and invisible things. For example, the concept of family, the concept of education. What are the concepts of success? What are the concepts of education, of cooperation? When you understand these deep and invisible kind of, focus points with your family, then you know that you're starting to build rapport and they're starting to come out and engage with you. And so if you don't know their concept of love or their concept of education, then you haven't, this is a good kind of demonstration to show you that you're not actually making really deep and the connection. So that's kind of probably the slide that I do want to end off with. And I probably want to just say that this is why the Takao and the Tautai group is really needed in this space, because as a professional kind of worker in this field, I'm often pulled between two worlds, and sometimes I need kind of help to navigate between two. So for example, I have professional guidelines that guide me as a psychologist. I have core competencies that guide me on how I portray myself as a psychologist. However, I have cultural views that help me guide me as a Pacific person. And so sometimes having those two kind of identities can clash at some points. And so I need that cultural supervision to be able to navigate my way through my practice, to ensure that not only I'm being a great psychologist, but I'm also staying true to myself as a Pacific Island person and as a Tongan. And so that's why I'm always grateful for the Takawa group and the Tautai group, because even though there's no Pacific psychologist in my space that I can go with some of these inquiries to, this group here is probably the next best space that I'm able to get a little bit of cultural supervision to ensure that, yes, I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to do as a psychologist, but I'm also not losing myself and my cultural identity in the process of that. So in saying that, I'm just going to hand it back over to Brian. Or actually, I'll probably open it up to any questions that anybody wants to ask. Sorry, I haven't seen the chat box, so if you've put something in there, I haven't yet read it.
Sonia, maybe what we can do is, so Rose has been monitoring the chat, and so she's got,
okay,
if there's any questions. So should we, because we're running out of time, should we just, we can forward those to you and you can answer those. Does that sound all right?
Yes, that's okay. That's perfect.
Yeah, Rose is going to say a thank you to you. Thanks to you and Chermei, and maybe we'll send you a gift of some coloured candy and some string so that you can continue the good work that you do. Rose, all up to you.
Whawhetai Chermei, malo aupito Sonia, thank you so much for giving up your time to share your knowledge, your experiences, the strategies and resources that you use to work with your Pacific students and families. And we also want to acknowledge Amy, who is an SLT, who's now moved on to Mount Richmond Special Education and who is still wanting to be part of our Takaua group. And she also will be bringing another Pacific perspective. And as Chermei said, our learning support friends are also growing their team of Pacific professionals. So we really, really enjoy and thank you so much for the time that you've given to us.